In this video, I'd like to tell a story of discovery about bird communities in the forests surrounding Pagosa Springs, Colorado. Pagosa Springs is a Colorado mountain town located along the southern margins of the San Juan Mountains. Wildfires are always a concern for our community, but thankfully, the United States Forest Service employs several methods to reduce wildland fuel loads and establish defensible zones strategically located to reduce the likelihood that wildland fires would cause catastrophic damage to our community or to the watersheds that we rely on for our freshwater supply. In 2019, volunteers from the Weminuche Audubon Society set out on a citizen science quest to discover whether wildland fuel reduction treatments like forest thinning or shrub layer thinning or prescribed fire had any impact on bird communities in forests subjected to these fuel reduction treatments. Using established field research protocols for studying bird communities, we were able to determine that, well, yes, many bird species leave an area during and in the months following some of these activities, but most bird species return within a year or two. 7 years of field data on bird community structure and composition has led us to a number of insights regarding the importance of birds to forest health and the reliance of many bird species on forests like those in our region for successful reproduction. More important, the shared experience of collecting these data has proven beneficial to the more than 70 volunteers involved in this project over the past 7 years, providing participants with opportunities to improve their birding skills, gain a better understanding of forest ecology, actively contribute to an ecological field study, strengthen bonds between birding enthusiasts, and simply enjoy being in the outdoors. If you'd like to know more about the specifics of how our field studies were conducted, or the detailed descriptions of the 5 sites we visited over the years, there is a link to our chapter's website in the description below, where project reports and YouTube videos can be found. But in this video, we want to focus on what we found out about what they do. One of our key findings is that there are many more bird species in our surrounding forests than we anticipated. 98 bird species at last count. That's a lot. Similar studies in our region typically report about half that number, probably because those studies were conducted over only 1 or 2 field seasons. Now first, 9 of those species that we observed were present at all 3 sites monitored in each year of the study. And those 9 species together accounted for a whopping 45% of all of the birds counted. That's 45% of a little more than 16,000 birds. Now, examples of those 9 very common species include the American robin, hairy woodpecker, pygmy nuthatch, and violet-green swallow, and the yellow-rumped warbler. Looking a little further into our data set, we find another 25 species that were observed in at least one of the 3 sites in each year of the study, and usually 2 or 3 of the sites, And when we counted up those birds and added them with those 9 very common species, we can now account for almost 3/4 of all of the birds observed over the course of the study. Examples of these additional 25 relatively common bird species include the dark-eyed junco, house wrens, Williamson sapsucker, Cason's finch, and even the common nighthawk. Well, that means that there are 64 bird species, or about 2/3 of the total, that were found only occasionally, and these accounted for less than 1/3 of the 16,000 birds that we counted. A few examples of these less common species include the evening grosbeak, dusky grouse, Lewis's woodpecker, Clark's nutcracker, and the three-toed woodpecker. This kind of pattern in commonness versus rarity is typical of ecological studies, regardless of the kinds of organisms that are studied. Black-capped chickadees, the hairy woodpecker and the mountain bluebirds, pygmy nuthatches and red crossbills and the western bluebirds are among those species. About half of all that we observed, about 56 out of 98 species, are year-round residents in our area, with almost all of these species accounted for in our local Christmas bird count. The other 42 species are migratory, some traveling as far as South America to overwinter and then returning to Pagosa country to breed during the summer months. Examples of these include the black-headed grosbeak, Grace's warbler, hermit thrush, Plumbeus vireo, and the western tanager. Looking closer at the conservation status of the bird species we've observed, and delving into the literature on bird population trends, we were alarmed to learn that almost half of the bird species we observed, that's 43 out of the 98 total, have exhibited substantial declines in their population numbers since the early 1970s. Moreover, 19 of the 56 resident species are in decline, with 23 of the 42 migratory species in decline. This underscores quite dramatically that there are many hazards associated with the migratory strategy, which makes reproductive success even more critical to the long-term survival of those bird species that have evolved to travel great distances between seasons. So our forests play a key role in the sustainability of those bird species that are in decline, whether they are resident species or are migratory. Some of the bird species that we've encountered in our study, like the Clark's nutcracker and red crossbill, feed on seeds and maybe some other plant material. We have sometimes observed red-tailed hawks that are predatory in nature, but the vast majority of the bird species we've observed rely on insects as their primary food source, at least during the breeding season, and oftentimes we catch them with bugs in their beaks. Clearly, the bird species that rely on insects for their food source provide an important service to maintaining forest health, for obvious reasons. Most of the insects that they feed on are herbivorous, and if their populations are not kept in check, these insect species would potentially have detrimental impacts on forest productivity. We've observed that the structure of the forest, the density of trees and maturity of the shrub and understory layers provide habitat for a vast array of insect species that birds feast upon. Not surprisingly, then, we can classify bird species by where they feed. Do they forage on or near the ground, search branches and leaves for their prey, or do they capture insects while in flight? Groundbrush foraging bird species, like the American robin, were most common at most of our sites, the exception being one site where the forest canopy is most dense and the understory is patchy or lacking. In that site, timber foliage searching species are most common, like the red-breasted nuthatch. Bird species that feed on flying insects, the various flycatcher species that we encountered, are more common in areas where the tree canopy is more open, providing these bird species with room to sally out and catch their prey. Food abundance is a critical factor for bird survival, but so is the availability of suitable nesting sites. Some birds that we've encountered in our study nest on the ground, like the dusky grouse and common nighthawks. We were pleasantly surprised to encounter common nighthawk nests in each year of the study. These are not easy to find. Common nighthawks lay 2 eggs at a time in little depressions that they scour out on the ground surface. We were even fortunate enough to be present at just about the time that a couple of nighthawk babies hatched. Once we learned how well camouflaged the common nighthawk nests and eggs and fledglings were, we took great caution whenever walking from one monitoring point to another. We also observed several bird species that build their nests on tree branches or in the shrub layer. For example, the western wood pewee and the warbling vireo. But there is another strategy that many bird species pursue, building their nests in cavities excavated in standing dead tree snags or even in living trees. Through repeated visitations to the same monitoring points within and across years, we have documented at least 29 bird species nesting in our study sites. 17 of those species nest on the ground or in shrubs and trees, with the other 12 species nesting in cavities. Examples of cavity nesters include the white-breasted nuthatch, northern flicker, violet-green swallow, and the house wren. Ground and tree nesting species seldom have difficulty finding suitable locations to build their nests. But for cavity nesting species, suitable sites may be limited. Standing dead snags are often a limiting resource for these species. Indeed, we have observed as many as 4 different bird species nesting in the same dead snag over the course of a sample season. Frequently, existing cavities may be used by the same or different species from one year to the next. Ensuring that standing dead trees are left in place by loggers or through the conduct of other management practices is particularly important, especially when you consider that almost half of the cavity nesting bird species are among those exhibiting significant population declines over the last several decades. Well, to bring our story full circle, much of what we have learned about bird and forest ecology through this project would not have been evident without our returning to the same sites and monitoring points within sites across several years. Numerous studies have confirmed a 25% drop in the number of birds and an increasing number of bird species dwindling to alarmingly low population numbers across North America. As noted in our study, migratory bird species are particularly vulnerable to habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, various forms of pollution and limited food resources, climate change, and many other vagaries associated with the expanding ecological footprint of human societies. Understanding the need for and importance of conserving critical habitats and resources, like food and nesting sites, is vital to protecting many bird species from extinction. Studies like ours provide important insights into what is happening in the dry mixed conifer forests that dominate our region, because we are able to document the bird species that are present. More important, the long-term nature of studies like ours provide insights revealing not only which species are present, but also which species are absent. Citizen scientists, the volunteers we enlist in this effort, are key to providing the expertise and presence to ensure bird conservation efforts succeed. Clearly, our bird monitoring project has been a great success, and we hope that it'll continue into the future. We know a great deal more about the bird communities in our area than ever before, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that what we know has a positive impact on how our forests are appreciated by outdoor enthusiasts and forest managers as well. Even more important, the personal rewards for the volunteers engaged in this project are immeasurable. Now, it's always a challenge to weave our findings into a story that balances the personal experience of birding with a purpose with the apparently more mundane analysis of the bird count data we collect and the excruciating details of their ecological roles that we try to understand. Now, the music and quotes and poems interweaved into this video were meant to broaden and enrich our perspective on why what we do as citizen scientists is so impactful. So perhaps it's fitting to close with a poem underscoring the theme of this year's work. So here it goes. Towhees have green tails and bluebirds are blue. Bugs in their beaks, it's what they do. Thanks, everyone.